Item 23 is Resolution 22-96, appointing the firm of Iverson Ravers to special counsel representing St. Paul Police Officer Jeremy Doverspike in the matter of Cullars-Doty et al. Versus City of St. Paul et al. This was laid over from last week.
All right, and this item was laid over from last week, and we would like to invite Portia Hampton-Flowers from the City Attorney's Office just to give us equivalent of a staff report. I think that there's just some questions that came up right in advance of last week's meeting, just about why are we doing this? What is the requirements behind this, and just to kind of fill in the legal framework around the next two agenda items would be helpful for council members.
Thank you, Council President Bryn Moen. The agenda items that are before you came as a result of litigation that the city is involved in, wherein 7 officers in the City of St. Paul have been named as defendants in relation to the death of Marcus Golden that occurred in 2015. 2 officers that are named as defendants fired their weapons as Marcus Golden attempted to flee or evade the officers. The matter was investigated, a grand jury was impaneled, and no charges were filed against those officers. In January of 2021, approximately 6 years later, the family filed a federal lawsuit against those 9 officers and the City of St. Paul. The City of St. Paul is statutorily required to provide defense and indemnification to its employees when they are performing their duties. There is a statute, Minnesota Statute 46607, Subdivision 1, which states that a municipality shall defend and indemnify its officers and employees, provided that the officer or employee was acting within the performance of duties of the position and was not guilty of malfeasance, neglect of duty, or bad faith. So far, there has been no determination that these officers that were involved in the shooting of Marcus Golden acted outside the scope of their employment or engaged in malfeasance. As a result, the city is statutorily required to provide them with defense and indemnification. In December of 2021, December 12th, the court issued an order allowing the plaintiffs to amend their complaint to add a claim under Minnesota's wrongful death statute. As a result of that claim, and as a result of the claims asserted in their amended complaint, each officer is entitled to an individualized defense, and the city cannot provide representation to both of those officers, nor can the city provide representation to one of those 2 officers without limiting its ability to defend the other officer. Under the Minnesota Rules of Professional Conduct, a lawyer is not allowed to represent an individual when there is a conflict of interest. And a conflict of interest exists when there is a risk that the representation of one or more clients will materially be limited by the lawyer's representation of another client. Because of that ethical obligation that we have, we cannot provide representation to those 2 officers that were involved in the shooting of Marcus Golden. I want to make sure that the council is aware that the City of St. Paul City Attorney's Office is representing the 7 other named officers that are involved in the lawsuit, as well as the City of St. Paul. The request for defense and indemnification is limited to those 2 officers that were involved in the shooting that are entitled to individualized representation, as well as the protection of the attorney-client privilege that comes with that representation. Lastly, Section 5.02 of the city charter authorizes the city attorney's office to seek the appointment of outside counsel when a conflict of interest exists, which brings us here today requiring the city council's approval of the appointment of outside counsel for those 2 officers.
Thank you very much. And really, as we're transitioning from being out of the office and back into the office, I know that the city attorney's office is very reliable on giving us these briefings in advance of these things coming up on the agenda. In this case, we did not have that briefing in advance. So this is very helpful for us because it's complicated, it has a legal basis, and so the clarification is very appreciated. And I know that it's outside of the norm to not get briefed in advance of the meeting, so acknowledging that it was a unusual set of circumstances, so we thank you for being here today. Does anyone have any particular questions for Ms. Hampton Flowers, or is that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any discussion on this item? Ms. Yang?
Thank you, Council President. I'd really like to say thank you, Portia. I know that these past few days we've directed a lot of questions your way, and you've really answered them diligently and always gotten back to us. I really appreciate you. And I want to say thank you to all of the community leaders who have reached out to us about this, specifically a handful of leaders from the Black Lives Matter movement who reached out to all of us on the council with questions, and very hard questions that were very important to ask for us prior to making this decision. And I really appreciate how the council took time to listen and also to be the bridge between our community and also our city attorneys, because I feel like that's what co-governance is, and that for us to actually be able to make well-informed decisions and make decisions on behalf of not only our city here, but the people we represent, it is our obligation and duty to really get all these answers. And I feel that we have asked all of those and really exhausted the options that we have on the table to really figure out what to do next. I know that, like, we're having in-person meetings today. Many of the leaders, if their schedules permitted, I know that we would have a full room here, because it was many of them who reached out about this, and I wanted to acknowledge that, because even though they're not here physically with us, like spiritually and also just like mentally, we should really keep them in mind in all of this, because this is really hard to talk about. No matter what, there was someone who lost their life, and that's Marcus Golden, and he is somebody who can never be replaced nor be put back onto this earth. And we know that there are so many people in our community who is mourning that, and one life lost is already too much. And this is why it's so important for us to really resolve this. And I want to share that because of the information that we have gotten from our city attorneys and how we have exhausted the options on the table, I will be supporting the recommendation from the city attorneys and feel that that is the way moving forward on how we can really get to the bottom of this and really get a resolution.
Thank you, Ms. Yang, and thank you. I know that questions emerged last week right before the meeting, and while I knew we had done this in the past, I wasn't able to recite immediately what was the legal premise, and so I appreciate very much the time to lay it over, to ask the questions, and to be clear what our statutory obligations are, and to understand the more context. And so we have time on these items, and I think just taking that time to ask the questions, find our resolution is very worthwhile and meaningful, and I thank you for your leadership in that. Ms. Jalali.
Thank you. I want to echo my thanks to Portia and our colleagues at the City Attorney's Office. We're very responsive as community members reached out to us, also just trying to understand what are the laws at play. I want to just also echo that one of the primary laws at play is that we have a statutory obligation to take this action and participate in the litigation the city is facing. And so I'm also supporting this action today, but feel that the community and community members who reached out to us sharpened the conversation and helped illuminate what is really is and is not happening. And I want to just say, extend my humble gratitude to the community members who shared those conversations with us about the process. Learned some points that I appreciate the City Attorney's Office also acknowledging that more proactive communication in the future for items like this is very necessary. I'd also like to just acknowledge that items like this can feel cold and procedural, and to a degree they are, because they're part of the things we have to follow under the law. But I also want to acknowledge that there's pain in our community related to the situation that this litigation involves. And working in my role as a councilwoman to make sure that we honor our obligations to the law and to this action, and also in our role as public-facing officials, working to operate, as always, with compassion for the realities of what people are going through. So I appreciate the time for the questions as well. I really appreciate the city attorney's office in working diligently to sort through all the factors here, and just wanted to make sure I could also speak to that since we received many questions over many days about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jalali. I'm going to move approval on this item, and again, appreciating the extra time, the extra empathy, and the professionalism and responsiveness from our city attorney's office as well on these questions. And none of us, well, some of us have a law degree, what the heck? None of us who had the conversation this morning have a law degree, so really getting a better understanding of what our obligation is and how we serve justice broadly for all involved. It does involve due process, and does involve that we hold up our end and our responsibility. So I appreciate that, and again, the opportunity to be very thoughtful about this. And so I will move approval. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted.